We call the special meeting of the Memorial Committee of the Jamestown Bar Association for the celebration of life of Bruce Scolton. The order of the day will be, I will read the obituary. We will have, I received some correspondence. We're going to share a presentation that Bruce did in 2002, our very first Law Day celebration here, and Bruce was our very first speaker. So this is an excerpt of that where he talks about the importance of law, and you'll be watching that. And then I'll open it up for conversation and reflection. Then we'll close that part of the Memorial Committee, and then we'll reopen up for a Jamestown Bar Association special presentation. Yes, Phil.
I hope I'm not out of order, but I understand that Bruce's son and daughter are here. Could you introduce them?
Yes. I'll have Paul Webb introduce them. Paul?
This is Bruce's son, Eric, and his daughter. Hi.
So welcome, family members, and thanks, Phil, for mentioning that. And at the conclusion, we'll have this transcribed, and the transcript will be provided to the family, so you'll have a memorial of this event. Bruce S. Scolton, 70, of Panama, New York, passed away Wednesday, April 24th, 2019, at the Heritage Park Rehab and Skilled Nursing Facility. He was born December 22nd, 1948, in Jamestown, New York, a son of the late Harold and Ruth Rowland Scolton. Bruce was a graduate of Panama Central School, where he excelled in both academics and athletics. He completed his undergraduate degree at Dartmouth College in 1971. Upon graduation, he enrolled and actively served in the United States Army from 1971 to 1973. He was honorably discharged in 1977 after completing his reserve obligation. Bruce earned his law degree from Duke University School of Law in 1976. He was admitted into the New York State Bar Association in 1977, and in 1984, the United States District Court, Western District of New York. Bruce was a partner in the law firm of Erickson, Webb, Scolton, and Haidu, where he practiced for more than 40 years. He also served his community as a long-standing Town of Harmony justice and was a member of the Jamestown, New York State, and American Bar Associations. Surviving are his daughter, Krista Odell, and son, Eric Scolton, both of Panama, 4 grandchildren, Natalie Odell, Lillian Odell, Danielle Scolton, and Jackson Scolton, all of Panama, a brother, Hugh Scolton, of Rochester, New York, and a sister, Peggy Hinson. Along with his parents, Bruce was preceded in death by his beloved wife, Joanne Harriger Scolton, who he married on February 19, 1971, and who passed on November 12, 2013. Dear Greg, I write this letter with a heavy heart as I am out of town and unable to attend the Bar Association tribute to our brother Bruce Scolton. Please read this letter into the record and make it part of the proceedings. The law office of Ledestro, Cass, Edwards, and Vanstrom were located on the 3rd floor of the Furniture Mart building, directly above the law offices of Erickson, Webb, and Scolton. As a young lawyer, I took every opportunity to interact with Bruce and his firm. During our lunch breaks spent at the YMCA, I worked out, ran, or played basketball with Bruce. I consider myself privileged to have known Bruce on both a professional and personal basis. I found Bruce to be a brilliant lawyer, a loyal friend, and a fierce advocate competitor. Bruce was always prepared, having reviewed all the facts, read the statute, and researched the cases back to the Norman Conquest of 1066, and was ready to recite the old common law. He was very articulate and persuasive in his legal arguments. Bruce was a competitor. I believe he reveled in beating someone in a fair one-on-one battle, yet he was the first person to come to the loser's aid. Most importantly, he was a loyal friend who cherished his family. He set the standards on the way he cared for his spouse, Joanne. Bruce always kept us up to date on his family. His family was his pride and joy. Talking about his children and grandchildren always brought a huge smile from Bruce. We have a lot to learn from our friends. I feel very blessed to have known Bruce. He has touched all of us. I will miss him very much. God bless Bruce and his family. Very truly yours, Stephen Cass. On Law Day 2002, the Robert Jackson Center had its very first Law Day program. And the very first speaker to a packed house of students was Bruce Scolton on the meaning of Law Day, and a little autobiography in his 10-minute presentation. So we're going to pause and reflect and just listen to Bruce.
Is give you an historical perspective on why Law Day came about and the reason that it should go forward. Now, most of you, I assume, are 16, 17 years old. And what I refer to living history during your lifetimes, you may have been aware early in your life, 5, 6, 7 years of age, with the collapse and fall of the Soviet Union, the Communist Party in Russia, or the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall. As an anecdote, I served in military service for 2 years in 71 and 73 in West Berlin, Germany. When the wall was in existence, the wall was real. There were killings on the wall, people trying to escape from East Germany, East Berlin into the West. I was a military policeman, so I'm well aware of the significance of the existence of the wall and the fall of that wall, in personal experience. But in your lifetimes, your life history, you don't know those things. That's textbook history to you. But let me know World War II, in Europe, in Latvia, Estonia, in their own republics, by military. Matched against that, all the what are now democracies, there wasn't any battles, there weren't any fires, but it was real. Delivering a speech to the United Nations, to the West, and specifically to the United Economic System, we were with UX-62 when the financial crisis. So in Cuba, and 8 miles away from the southern tip of Florida, the ballistic missiles aimed at our cities, mass destruction. It was in my lifetime. The Soviet Union started giving, continued right through, at least to the satellite countries that it controlled, that they were in control, and that any effort to break away from their control of the Communist Party would be brutally put down and eradicated by the massive force of the Red Army. Hungary in 1956 is a great example. The country was invaded, occupied, and continued that way until the fall of communism in the 1990s. That was the scene that presented itself to Charles Ryan when he got the idea that we as a democracy, we as a capitalist society, should do something to counteract these threats, this barbarism of threats of massive retaliation and armed dominance. He came up with the idea of law to explain and educate both to our citizens and to the citizens of the rest of the country, specifically to the Eastern Bloc, so that they would understand that there is an alternative. The alternative would not be a display of military might, even though we have that. The process would be an education process on the rule of law, the rights of man, and government by popular election. That puts Law Day more in a historical perspective. But merely because merely because the Soviet Union is no longer that nuclear military threat that it once was, and you don't have that specter of annihilation hanging over you like our fathers and our generation did, there's no reason to believe that Law Day is less significant. It still retains its significance. But most of the rights and liberties that you understand we have as American citizens, of course you all know are founded in our Constitution. The history of our country starts what year? Declaration of Independence? 1776, right? The Revolutionary War was fought and ended in 1783 treaty again. Most of us think that was a big event in world history. We fail to remember that there was a worldwide conflict during that time, a conflict between the British Empire, the French Empire, and the clash in Europe and the North American continent. Our American Revolution was just kind of sidelined, and not too significant. We had to fight the British again in 1812 to convince us that something happened in 1776 or 1783. But the point is, we didn't become a nation until 1783. A constitutional form of government took place in what year? Constitution, first 10 amendments ratified by the 13 original colonies. 1789, correct. So from 1789, less than 250 years ago, is when the basic document that that assures us of our rights and liberties as Americans came into effect. We fought a civil war in 1865 to 68. Several amendments were added to the Constitution. 13th outlawing slavery. The 14th, the protection due process clause was applied to the states. 13th and 14th amendments in 1865 or 1868, one of those 2 years. That is under 50 years ago. Those are the basic documents. The Constitution, the Fifth Amendment of the original Constitution, the 14th Amendment after the Civil War, that combined form the basis for all of the laws that we now have in effect, all of the Supreme Court cases that identify, pronounce our rights and liberties, and the laws that protect our rights and liberties. They all emanate from those times. But look how long it took to actually get them in place on the books to enforce and for the courts to recognize them. Slavery was outlawed by the 13th Amendment in 1865 or 1868. The Fifth Amendment's been around since 1789. The 14th since after the Civil War. But when did the Supreme Court outlaw discrimination officially by striking down the separate but equal laws of the states concerning the separation of the races? Anybody have an idea? 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education of the People of Kansas. 1954, almost 100 years after the 13th Amendment was enacted. The significance of that, the population wasn't ready. The political theory, the constitutional underpinnings were always there, but the people weren't ready. The Supreme Court anticipated the public acceptance of these principles and advanced them. Most of you are all familiar with the criminal justice system and the rights that individuals have in the criminal justice system. The right to remain silent, you know, the typical, you have the right to remain silent. You can say will be used against you in court of law. You have a right to attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, one will be provided for you at no cost. What are they called? Miranda rights. Exactly. Where did they date from? 1963. Excellent. Excellent. Arizona, Miranda versus the state of Arizona, I believe. Another Supreme Court case in 1963. Gideon versus Wainwright. Right to counsel at early stage of criminal proceedings. All of those cases announced by the Warren, Chief Justice Earl Warren from California, was the Chief Justice that led these things, took place in the 60s. This was the Supreme Court leading the public, ahead of the public, ahead of the citizens, in announcing that we have these rights and we're going to protect them. We're going to recognize them. The courts can't protect it. The courts recognize it. The protection comes from the executive branch and legislation. Congress did follow up, but when? Segregation was pronounced unconstitutional in 1954. It took the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, the March on Selma, Alabama, the sittings at the lunch counters, Rose Parks refusing to sit in the back of the bus. All of these things, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the integration, forced integration by Alabama's National Guard, sent by Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy to Alabama against George Wallace in Alabama. That took all those things, and the assassination of Robert Kennedy is a direct result of that, in my humble opinion. All of those things that took that before we enacted our civil rights legislation in 1967 under Lyndon Johnson. 13 years after the Board of Education versus People of Kansas. Then the public was ready to accept those principles. The public was ready to elect officials who would enact those anti-discrimination laws and the civil rights laws that we now have and are enforced established historical, very recent rights, but still need protecting. Nuclear holocaust may be lessened, the threat of that may be lessened. Look around the world, look at the conflicts. The alternative to our equal justice under law, the rule of law, is what you see in other parts of the world. We still have every incentive to protect those concepts. It's going to be up to you to embrace them, to understand them, to protect them, and to propagate them for your children and your children's children. It's a burden that you're going to have to bear. The alternative is unacceptable. I hope you bear that burden well. Law Day has a meaning. It's education. You should continue to learn about equal justice under law, the rule of law, not the rule of man, equal access to the courts to enforce that equal justice under law, and to perpetuate it for your children. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce obviously set the bar really high that as the first Law Day presenter. And did you notice they didn't refer to his notes? I mean, this was a 10-minute, actually it was longer, catalog of the history of our laws, and you saw it, but that was remarkable presentation. And he did not go back to 1066, even the Norman Conquest, but just about. So I'm going to share that, and by the way, that's up on YouTube for the family members. We put that up, so if you want to share that, you certainly may. At this point, I'd like to call forward anybody who would like to have a reflection on Bruce. Again, this is to be transcribed and ultimately given to the family. And so, if I could, I'll lead into this. Just a vignette. Had the pleasure of working with Bruce for as long as I've been here, 40 plus years. But what I have a terrific reflection and recollection is my bachelor party. Bruce, we all know, was an athlete extraordinaire. And my bachelor party was on a Saturday. So what did Bruce do on Saturdays in the 70s? Played softball, played baseball. So he comes fully adorned in his absolute outfit, uniform. He has one thing in mind, because at some point during the bachelor party at our camp in Panama, New York, which had a pond, they were going to pond me. It seemed only appropriate that they do that. And there is a spectacular photo, I wish I could have shown it, of Bruce in uniform, gleefully holding my hands as they were doing 1, 2, 3, and woof, off into the pond. My good friend, Bruce Scolton, coupled by Trip Price, the biggest, as you can imagine, grin, the process. So many incidents, but that's one which is probably directly personal to me. In fact, I asked Paul, why don't you come up? Your eulogy was incredible. And I'm not asking you to reflect on the entire eulogy, but you did a whole wonderful piece on Bruce, and I'd love for you to share that with this audience, if you could.
Well, Greg and most of you know, I mean, I was very fortunate because I got to practice with Bruce for 43 years. And he was not only, as we all know, an exceptional lawyer, but I like to say he kind of led really what I would call the American dream. He raised a great family. He helped his community. He did, what he wanted to do, and he really excelled in about everything that he did. He could have been a great teacher. He was a great coach. He did teach at JCC for a while, and when he was there, I had numerous students that he'd had over a period of time come up to me and tell me what a great teacher he was, best teacher that they'd ever had. But Bruce, he didn't come from a family of wealth. He had he grew up the hard way. His mother died when he was 3, and he had an older brother and a sister, and he was his dad couldn't take care of him at that point. So he had to put Bruce and his brother and sister in the orphanage in Randolph, where they spent some time. And eventually his dad remarried, and he was able to get him out of the orphanage, and he started school here in Jamestown. And he was, in fact, one of his childhood friends, who he became lifelong friends with, Doug Anderson. Maybe some of you know him or not. But at the funeral, he said, you know, I was in first grade with Bruce, and I was having a hard time in math. And he said, Bruce could tell I was struggling. He leaned over and he said, "Don't worry, I'll help you." And that was really, you know, I think exemplified Bruce in so many ways. I really didn't, after he started school here in Jamestown, later on he moved to Panama. And that's kind of where he really started to excel. I mean, of course, he excelled in sports, but he also excelled academically. I think he was valedictorian of his class at, you know, in Panama, and got into Dartmouth Law School, where, I don't know, he was number 1 or 2 in his class at Dartmouth. And then you heard from his video, he went on and joined the, enlisted in the Army, again, served 2 years, came back, and got into Duke Law School, where he again excelled at Duke and was editor of the Duke Law Review. I really came in contact with Bruce during his junior year in law school at Duke. He wanted to clerk for us during the summertime, and I knew Bruce only really by reputation from sports, and his high school football coach, Jack Keeney, who loved Bruce, thought he was, you know, tremendous athlete, person, etc. And so he came to work for us during the summertime. Of course, Phil, you know, a lot of you knew our partner, Phil Erickson. We both loved Bruce. He was a fantastic person, but he indicated that he had married at that time his high school sweetheart, Joanne, who he started going with, I think, about 15, and ultimately they got married, raised a beautiful family. But Bruce said that him and Joanne wanted to come back, and he wanted to practice in this area, and we didn't really think that would be possible because, you know, he was getting a lot of offers from down on Wall Street, and he had some friends down on Wall Street. In fact, his friend Dougie Anderson, who he went to school with from Jamestown, who was an investment banker on Wall Street, and wanted Bruce to come down in that area. And Bruce got a lot of offers, but Lord and behold, he said he was coming back and going to come in with us. And Bruce at that time, he didn't even know what he was going to make. He never even talked to us about money. He just said, "I'm coming back and I'm going to be with you." And he came back, and as I said, we've been together for 43 years, and Bruce is, you know, what we all like to call a lawyer's lawyer. I mean, he did everything. He was a smart guy, but he was able to do, you know, real estate deals. He incorporated businesses. He did criminal matters. He did bankruptcies. You name it, Bruce did it. He was a people's lawyer, and one that we can all really be, I think, proud of to have known and, you know, been able to work with. And one thing that Bruce can and his family can take credence in is that he helped a lot of people. And we've gotten a lot of, you know, people that have called afterwards that have missed him and appreciated all the things that he did. So we were fortunate, and the community was fortunate. Certainly Erickson, Webb, Scolton, and Hoydu was fortunate. I was fortunate. He made a big impact on my life. And so Okay.
Others who might want to share a thought or two? Rennie, if you want to come up, please.
Thanks, Greg. For the record, those of you who don't know me, I'm Ren Perlee. Practiced with my dad Willard here for 26 years until he retired. And I got to know Bruce pretty well. I can't say we were close friends, but this is when Erickson, Webb, and Scolton were downtown, and all the lawyers were downtown. And so I saw him quite a lot, and although I wasn't a close friend, I thought of him and myself as brothers in the law, because we ran into each other a lot at bar meetings over at the town club and just walking down the street. And he was always very, very friendly, and also I knew him to be a very, very intelligent man and an excellent lawyer. But we always had a lot of fun when we ran into each other, and we'd talk about what was going on in the law, what was going on around town, and various things in terms of both legal matters and just the general things that were going on in the Jamestown area. So I just wanted to say that I was very surprised and shocked when I heard that he was so sick, and we're the same age. And he was a wonderful guy, an excellent lawyer, and I'll truly miss him. And I know an awful lot of people here will also. Thank you.
Thank you, Rennie.
Hi, my name is Barbara Widrig, and you probably know my nephews, Jason and Scott. And so in my juvenile delinquent days, I didn't need an attorney, so I didn't know an attorney. But when I first came to buy a home, we had, of course, to get a note and mortgage because I didn't have thousands of dollars in the bank to purchase the house. And so, you know, the only lawyer we really knew was Bruce. So we called Bruce and made the appointment and filled out all the paperwork. And he has a special place in my heart. So I was so nervous to take out this mortgage. It was like I was signing my life away. And he could tell that I was nervous, and I told him I was. And don't you know, he came around from his desk and came next to me, and he went through every paragraph in that note and mortgage and explained it to me. He must have spent like an hour and a half. He made no money on this deal. But he really showed the compassion and was a true gentleman in every respect. He relieved my stress. I signed the papers, and we took possession of the house. And don't you know, in a couple of weeks, he stopped by, and I'll never forget. It was 6:30 at night. He was on his way home from the office. He stopped by the house to come in. He sat down at the kitchen table with us and spoke with us, and he just wanted to make sure that I was okay buying that house. So your father is someone to be very proud of, and I know it's a great loss for you, but it's even a greater loss for our community at large. So thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Barbara.
My name is Paul Andrews. I'm retired now, not like Bruce was, but I got to know Bruce when I came and got admitted in 1982. And I was in private practice at that time before I went into the DA office full time. Did a lot of real estate with Bruce, other matters as well, but mainly playing basketball and playing golf. And we'd always try and sneak out, and I still remember one March. This was in March. It was so warm. We ended up golfing over at South Hills. And he'd always beat me. He was such a great golfer. And later on, when I got into the DA office, I took over town of Busti. And we had calendar call one night. All of a sudden, guy shows up, full baseball regalia, representing, I don't know if he had 1 or 2 or 3 clients at that time, but Greg's little vignette triggered that memory for me, and I never let him live that down. And I think he just loved that moment, just to the system. And then I was riding my bike by his house one time. It was a hot summer day, and he was at the pool, so I said, I'm going for a dip. And I think his daughter was there, and had a great time, then talked him into getting on his bike and riding back to my house. We had a beer out on the deck. And I'd always, everything I had with Bruce, I knew he would talk to me until sometimes I felt like my eyes were glazing over. And sometimes I'd say, Bruce, it's only a misdemeanor. But, you know, and maybe, George, I should make this official on the record. The only thing I didn't like about Bruce was when he was town justice, and I had Callan to call out there. I was an ADA out there at that time. I think George was in the public defender's office. He would come in at 7 o'clock, and I'd have a few cases. George would have a few cases. And we'd get there. We were always punctual. We were always there at 7 o'clock. Bruce would come in, hang up his coat, sit down, and he'd open up his mail. And he would read his mail. We have a full room here of people. And I'd always try and tell him later, Bruce, we got things to do. We want to go. But that was the way he handled everything. And, you know, looking back, you laugh about it. Not at the time. You were mad. But he's a great guy. I really do miss him. So thank you.
Not used to doing this anymore. My name is Lydia Romer. I'm the retired chief clerk of the Surrogates Court. And I first met Bruce in 1990 when I became the chief clerk. And my first experiences with Bruce were not necessarily in the practice of law so much as him running interference between me and Phil Erickson. Those of us who remember me in those days, it was, and we were in the Jamestown in the building, which Hotel Jamestown was very close, and we had some good times. But I soon learned that Bruce had a really sharp mind, attention to detail, and he loved to match wits with me over some interpretation of the SCPA or the EPTL, and it was always a little thing. But as Judge Cass said, he was always well prepared. His arguments were well thought out, well researched. So once in a while I felt guilty and I'd let him win. Bruce and I had a lot in common. We both graduated high school in '67. And watching him recite some of the events from the '60s, we would talk about things like that, you know, especially when my office was across from family court when we were on the other side, and he'd be waiting, he'd pop in and sit down, and we would reminisce about those days in his military service. I just don't have anything more to say except that I hope he rests well, my dear friend, and he was, I considered, a dear friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia, and it was a delight to hear you actually acknowledge that you let somebody win.
I'm probably the only person in this room who had the experience of going to law school with Bruce. We met in 1973 in August, and probably about a week or two after law school began, everybody had their little places where they hung out in the library, where they had a table. And pretty much people had staked their territory early on, and I was at a table, and there was another table right next to it. There's this guy there named Bruce Scolton. And talked for a minute and realized that we were both from Chautauqua County, New York. And he wasn't the least bit ashamed of that. He was proud of it. So was I. And from then on, we communicated regularly. He was a class behind me. I had one class with him my first year, and then after that, a number of them along the way. But what was amazing about Bruce was he was probably the most disciplined human being I've ever met. He had segments of time devoted to do what was important in his life, and the most important thing was Joanne and Krista. The next most important thing was law school to him at that time, but also his community. There was no question that Bruce loved Panama. I'd been in Panama for almost a year one time. I lived with my grandparents. I went to school at Blockville for, I don't know, 3 months or 4 months. That was the two-room schoolhouse down in the center of the urban metropolitan area known as Blockville. And then we went up to Panama. The next year I went to Lakewood, and in a lot of ways I wish I had remained in Panama. I know it's amazing. Out of that little class that I was in, I know all kinds of people. But the thing that was so impressive about Bruce was how he approached everything. He was disciplined, he was calm, he worked hard, he made sure he knew what he was dealing with. It was interesting. In law school, we were there at the end of the Vietnam era. Bruce had the fortune of not spending any time in Vietnam, but all of the people that were in the military were different than everybody else. We had probably about 10 people in my class that had served in the military, and maybe as many or more in Bruce's class. And what was really interesting was they didn't get hassled, they didn't get bothered. They knew that whatever somebody was throwing at them didn't matter because they'd lived through something a lot worse. And so, you know, the panic that you have when you walk into class and you're supposed to have understood the 45 pages that you read the night before, and you start getting grilled about it. And we had, well, we don't need to talk about it, but anyway, it didn't bother me. It didn't bother those guys. They just worked through it, and they were fine. Obviously, it bothered me, so that's why I noticed it. But, you know, Bruce was right into it early on. He was very intense, and it was very impressive to have the opportunity to be with somebody from Jamestown, New York, Chautauqua County, New York, who performed as well as he did. He was phenomenal. Joanne and Krista had me over for dinner with Bruce a couple of times, and I, of course, didn't reciprocate, but and you wouldn't want it to where I was living. But so anyway, he was really an amazing person in terms of being in school. And then he spent his summer at Erickson Webb and Scolton. Before he went back, I was a third-year student. I'd taken the bar exam. We talked. There was never much question in my mind that he was going to come back to Jamestown if he had an opportunity. He loved Panama. He loved his community. He loved the people in it. He gave all of himself for the last 40 years representing them. And so that was, and of course I was coming back because I was going to do the same, I guess, in the community I was in. The thing that really drove you nuts about Bruce, though, was his damn commitment to grammar. I mean, you would send him a simple agreement, and he would start telling you over the phone, well, I don't think I can have my client sign this. So I'd say, Bruce, it's what we talked about. Yeah, but the tense and the sentence, there's two different tenses, and they don't work out. I didn't even know what the heck he was talking about most of the time. And that was pretty cool. Another thing, sat near Arthur today because our first, well, known Arthur for a long time, as we all have, but our first year, his first year of law school, there was this big plaque up near the courtroom, And it invited all of us to a North Carolina Trial Lawyers Association educational forum. And didn't think much about it. Bruce pointed out to me, he goes, see that name right there? He's from Jamestown. How did he get here? Well, he wasn't there, but at the time, but Art was speaking at our law school in North Carolina in 1974. And 1973, 1974, anyway. So that was another Jamestown connection. So anyway, thank you. I don't mean to go on and ramble because I usually try to be directed in what I say, but it's very hard and very sad to see Bruce leave us so soon. Thank you.
Along those lines of Duke University and Law School of Law, and folks, you may remember, Dale, at one point we at the Jackson Center were surprised that there was a guy named Kenneth Starr. Kenneth Starr came down here when he was at Chautauqua, was taking notes about Jackson. Next thing you know, since he's here, the red alert goes out. We're going to interview, of course, I'm going to interview Ken Starr. He's here. I didn't invite him. He showed up. And next thing you know, I called Dale, called Bruce. Moment right there, and the guy who probably asked more questions than anybody else was Bruce. He was on it. And this is no prep, but boom. We had Ken Starr, we had a Duke University School of Law moment.
Hi, I'm Neil Robinson. I just thought it might be appropriate since I was admitted to practice law the same year as Bruce. It was Bruce and I and Greg and Trip Price, Lanny Sheffield. So we're all sort of close because of that experience. I've known Bruce, obviously, for 40-some years and always respected his opinion. He was one of those lawyers, if you ever had something you didn't know the answer to or which direction to go, which happens to me on a daily basis, but I would call Bruce, and if I knew it was something he would have some knowledge about. And he was always very helpful. And, you know, phone conversations or conversations with Bruce, at some point, you were always laughing when you were talking to him, and you know, he comes across like he did on the video here as a very serious guy, which he was. As Dale said, he was extremely disciplined and committed. But I always felt that Bruce had an excellent sense of humor. One of the things that impressed me about Bruce was what a big deal he was in the town of Harmony. When I was a young lawyer, I went to Panama High School to speak at Law Day. Every teacher I met, you must know Bruce Scolton. You know, it was the first thing they said. I know Bruce. For the past 15 years or so, I've been the attorney for the town of Harmony, simply because no one else will. Any lawyers out there looking for something to do? But going out to the town of Harmony, when I first started going there, everybody I met, well, you know Bruce, you must know Bruce. And everybody in the town knew and respected Bruce, which I think certainly says something about an individual, the way he's that respected in his community. And I would like to comment, my first experience when I ran into Bruce was not particularly pleasant. It was probably summer of 1963 or 1964. I played a lot of baseball back at that time, and I was playing summer baseball for some team. I can't remember which one. I switched baseball teams about as often as I switched law office locations. But I was a pitcher, and another kid was starting that game pitching, and the coach told me, why don't you go out in right field, and Robinson will bring in a relief. So early on in the game, I was in right field. I hear this screeching of tires, and I see this typical Chautauqua County scene, mind you, back then. This pickup truck come roaring down the street next to Packard Field in Lakewood. It's got about 8 people in the back of it. As I said, typical Chautauqua County scene. I look at it, and it comes and it stops right next to the right field area, and it's full of teenagers, boys, and I say to myself, oh, crap. And I recognized one of them. It was Bruce Scolton. And I didn't know Bruce, but I recognized him because his picture was always in the sports pages back then. He was such a legend in Panama. And Bruce and his buddies got out and decided to play baseball right behind me in right field. So, I mean, they were several years older than me, and what do? They're making fun of me, making fun of my uniform with Asheville Agway on the back. Throwing the ball, seeing how close they could get to me. I couldn't wait till our pitcher got bombed, and I could get out of there. And eventually it happened, but that was an unpleasant experience. But I guess the story behind it, Bruce was doing what he loved, and that was playing sports. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? If not, we'll call this part of our special meeting, the celebration of life of Bruce Scolton, to a close, and then I will reopen another special meeting of the Jamestown Bar Association for a special presentation. Marilyn?
Hello, I'm Marilyn Fiore-Lehman. I'm from the Nominations Committee for the Jamestown Bar Association. And every year we nominate an attorney or attorneys that we believe are deserving of an award, a special award for the Jamestown Bar Association. It's the Community Service Award. And this year we nominated Bruce Scolton and Paul Webb. And rather than award, we normally give the award out at our annual meeting, but because of the memorial service and because this is for Bruce, we wanted to make the special presentation of the award here today. And I would like to call down his partners to talk about Bruce and to present the award to his family. Thank you.
I'm Lyle Hoydu, and I'm here with my partners Paul Webb Jr. and Paul Webb III. And it's our privilege to highlight a lifetime of community service by our former partner and colleague and friend, Bruce Scolton. Over his lifetime, Bruce was in active duty in the U.S. Army for 2 years. He served in the Army Reserve for an additional 4 years. He presided as justice in the town of Harmony almost 30 years. He was town attorney for Clymer, and he provided advice and counsel for the Panama School District for many years. He served as the church attorney for the Panama United Methodist Church, and he also would swing a hammer for building projects. He was a coach and a referee for youth basketball, and he was an assistant coach for the Panama High School baseball team. He also served as a scout for the Panama High School football program. He co-organized the Jack Keeney Memorial Scholarship. Jack Keeney was Bruce's coach from high school. He contributed to the Chautauqua County Sports Hall of Fame. He was a teacher at the Jamestown Community College. He volunteered his time, talents, and money for numerous community projects. He helped build school playgrounds. He worked on park conservation projects, and he supported the Historical Society. He also contributed his time and his money to numerous nonprofit organizations, the Roger Torrey Peterson Institute, the Fenton Museum, and the Robert H. Jackson Center. In fact, when you walked in today, Bruce and his wife Joanne are recognized on the steps as you come in as significant contributors. And although we cannot personally present this award to Bruce, we have the honor of presenting the Jamestown Bar Association Community Award to the children of Bruce Scolton, Krista Odell and Eric Scolton. If you can come down.
Congratulations. I just want to let's give them a round of applause. You can be justly proud. Hopefully you gleaned some humor and some fact, maybe a little fiction about the life and times of Bruce Scolton, and there are many of them here, some of them, many of them unstated, but I'm sure they'll be happy to share them maybe later today. So with that, we stand adjourned, and thank you everyone for coming.